Carolina, Daniela, Bonita, Bermúdez, Carolina, Puerto Rico, Real de...
Okay, we'll start with this. I'm sure most of you have heard by now, per tweet from Mike Kopinger, Oscar De La Hoya tells me he's exploring a deal with Triller that could see the entire Golden Boy stable, led by Ryan Garcia, leaving DAZN. Deal with DAZN expires end of this year. And you can't say I didn't told you so, because I did.
Told you.
When I saw that there were talks, potential talks, of Franchon Cruz versus Aline Cedar-Ruz landing on Triller, when I saw that there were talks of Oscar De La Hoya's big comeback fight also landing on Triller, I questioned why these events would be associated with Triller.
And not DAZN.
Oscar already has a deal with a major platform, DAZN. Why would his comeback fight take place anywhere else? I questioned what the relationship between Golden Boy Promotions and DAZN was. What was the current standing of that relationship now that Golden Boy no longer had Canelo Alvarez as a bargaining chip? Another tweet from Mike Kopinger by way of Oscar De La Hoya reads, "From my personal experience with Triller and watching the numbers they have put up in just their last two shows, I've been extremely impressed," Oscar said. "We are engaging in conversations with the executives at Triller, and we will see where they land." Earlier today, Oscar De La Hoya himself, by way of video message in so many words, confirmed that the news is real and the story checks out.
We all face adversity, but check it out. Let me be a perfect example. The beast is awake. Golden Boy forever. Oh, it's on, baby.
That video excerpt is by way of Pheno Boxing. I want to start off by saying that I saw this coming, and I've been talking about it the last couple of weeks, maybe a little over a month, maybe over a month.
Over several months.
As there are many pieces to this puzzle and many different sides of the story. The catalyst, as it were, at least from where I'm sitting, is Canelo Alvarez parting ways with Golden Boy Promotions. That was their biggest bargaining chip with DAZN. And Canelo Alvarez going his own way, doing his own thing, still fighting on the DAZN platform, just not under the Golden Boy Promotions banner. That changed the relationship between Golden Boy Promotions and the people over there at DAZN. And that bit of it, that happened months ago, before Canelo fought Avni Yildirim, and before that, when he fought Callum Smith, before all of that, in November of last year. The inciting incident, the catalyst that led us here, is Canelo Alvarez parting ways with Golden Boy, because if not for that, Golden Boy would have still had Canelo to use as a bargaining chip with the people over there at DAZN. But Canelo splitting from them, that caused the relationship to change. The dynamic, it's entirely different now.
Golden Boy is not a big priority to DAZN anymore.
You think about that, and then you think about the people over there at Triller, what they're trying to do. I told you guys that I found it quite peculiar that they would have been willing to put up $6 million just to land Lopez versus Kambosos Jr. I thought to myself, what's the end game here? Because this fight, this ain't a big fight, and every boxing fan that is a boxing fan knows that just because they have the money to blow, you still have to reconcile why it is they're blowing it. What are they trying to do?
I told you they were trying to send a message.
But their interest in the sport of boxing may not be limited to staging novelty acts between retired fighters, between retirees, old legends. Their interest in the sport of boxing might actually be more extensive because they're willing to blow $6 million just to land Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos Jr. Talked about this in several videos, and I'll leave the links to those videos in the description box. Essentially, what the people over there at Triller were trying to do,
And is still trying.
pretty much the same thing that DAZN did when they debuted in America. They were willing to overpay fighters to acquire talent.
Why would they be trying to acquire talent?
Told you, it's because their interest in the sport of boxing is not limited to staging novelty acts between retired fighters. What they're trying to do is build a stable. With this recent news that the Golden Boy Promotions stable might be migrating from DAZN over there to Triller, that's the confirmation I was looking for. That's the confirmation I needed. That Triller intends to be a player, perhaps even a major player, in the sport of boxing, and they're looking to acquire talent. They saw the rift that Teofimo Lopez was having with Bob Arum, people over there at Top Rank, and they decided to capitalize on it. You saw Regis Prograrius, who currently is a network and promotional free agent. You saw him make an appearance on Triller for the Ivan Redkach fight. And now you're hearing that the Golden Boy Promotions stable might be migrating from one platform over to another. Ladies and gentlemen, what that indicates is that Triller is trying to be its own entity in the world of boxing, and they mean to acquire the Golden Boy Promotions stable of fighters to helm that endeavor. Now, this could mean one of two things for Golden Boy Promotions. One of two things. The first is the more obvious conclusion that Golden Boy might actually go to Triller. That much we can deduce. The second thing it could mean is that maybe they're using this situation as leverage to get the people at DAZN to give them a better deal because their current deal is set to expire this year.
In other words, give us a better deal or we're out of here.
You want to pay attention to who Ryan Garcia is in all of this. What's his role? Ryan Garcia, who very recently pulled out of the Javier Fortuna fight because he says he's going through some mental health issues. He suffers from anxiety. A lot of people, they don't believe him. They believe he pulled out for some other reason. And in light of this news, maybe the reason that Ryan Garcia pulled out of that fight is because he's the centerpiece for Golden Boy Promotions' deal with Triller. For some, it's hard to reconcile how a guy who likes being in front of the camera as much as Ryan Garcia likes being in front of the camera, it's hard to reconcile how somebody like this could be suffering from anxiety issues when he chooses to live his life in front of the eyes of the prying public. He chooses to do these things. He's got a sizable social media following on Instagram and here on YouTube, yet he claims he's suffering from anxiety issues. Then why are you putting your whole life on display for everybody to see it? That's why some people are struggling with that. A part of me feels that the real reason Ryan might have pulled out of that fight is because he's the centerpiece for Golden Boy Promotions' deal, and now is not the time to be taking on risky fights while this deal is being negotiated.
Ryan Garcia is a boxer / influencer.
And what's Triller comprised of? Social media guys, influencers, public personas like Ryan Garcia. He might be the centerpiece for this Golden Boy Promotions deal with Triller. And he'd fit right in over there because that audience, that's his audience.
That's who he appeals to.
All of this might be the real reason that he pulled out of that fight. The next thing you have to ask yourself is, well, okay, Golden Boy Promotions plans on migrating over to Triller. Well, what, we're supposed to pay pay-per-view prices for every Golden Boy Promotions card? That's not going to work. And I don't think that's what the people over there at Triller plan on doing. I don't think they plan on charging an arm and a leg every time Golden Boy Promotions has a card. Up until now, what boxing matches they have been staging and intended to stage were all novelty acts. They don't yet have a stable. But if they acquire Golden Boy Promotions as a promotional banner, I hardly think they're going to charge you $50 to $80 every time a Golden Boy Promotions fighter has a fight.
What they want to do is give you their own brand of boxing.
And put their own unique, albeit irreverent, spin on it. I told you, take that Lopez purse bid as an indicator that Triller's interest in the sport of boxing is not limited to staging cards for retired fighters.
We'll see what's next.
In other news, a continuation to a story that we talked about in my previous video, Michael Hunter is reportedly not going to pursue his IBF final eliminator against Filip Hrgovic. New IBF rankings due out soon, but based on last month's list, next in line would be Hrgovic versus Joseph Parker, winner mandatory for Anthony Joshua. We've already talked about the Michael Hunter stuff and what I think is going on there. Now we have to talk about the other side of that story, the other affected parties, Filip Hrgovic, Joseph Parker. What does that mean? You take a trip over to the IBF's current rank standings and you'll see that Charles Martin is actually in the top spot. But we all know that Charles Martin walked away from what was supposed to be a Michael Hunter fight. That's how it ended up being about Michael Hunter and Philippe Hrgovic. You can forget about Alexander Usyk because he's already got a prime spot by way of the WBO. So him being at number 2 via the IBF, that don't mean a whole heck of a lot. He's already where he wants to be as far as alphabet rank standings and being in a pole position to challenge the winner of Joshua versus Fury. That's already done. Joseph Parker's got at least 2 options on the table right now.
Because he's the next highest ranked contender.
He's got 2 options. He can have that rematch with Derek Chisora, that rematch that I'm not convinced comes off. I'm really not sure. And I talked about that in my post-fight recap video. I'll leave the link to that video in the description box, where I talked about why I'm not so sure that rematch happens and why did things happen the way they happen. But he's got 2 options. He can fight Derek Chisora for a second time, which really doesn't do anything for him, or he can so decide to participate in this final eliminator with Philippe Hrgovic now that Michael Hunter has taken himself out of the running. What does Joseph do? And a part of me feels that, you know what? He might fight Philippe Hrgovic. He might. Because on the other side of that Philippe Hrgovic fight is everything an aspiring boxer or an aspiring former champion aspires to.
The rewards.
Joseph Parker's been on easy street for a while. At least a little while. You know, Alex Lapai, Shondell Winters. A lot of time wasted on those kinds of fights. Very recently, things got interesting with his domestic rival, Junior Fa. And even more recently, he took on Derek Chisora. But for Joseph, I mean, there's no point in going back. The only thing left to do is move forward. Because if you're not moving forward, then what are you doing? You know, if by some chance Joseph Parker passes on this opportunity, Agit Kabayel, unbeaten Agit Kabayel of Germany, he's spoken for. He fought once last year against a journeyman, and he's set to fight again this year in June against Kevin Johnson in what is so obviously a tune-up fight. Because in June, it will have been just 1 month short of a year since Agit saw any action. That being said, Agit's not likely to take on Philippe Hrgovic. Tony Yoka might, but I question whether or not the Yoka people want to have that fight sooner rather than later. It looks to me like Joseph Parker, he might actually be the likeliest candidate in the IBF's current rank standings to take on Philippe. Because Luis Ortiz ain't going to fight Philippe Hrgovic. In all likelihood, Luis Ortiz's next fight might come against his stablemate by way of the PBC, Andy Ruiz. We know that there are active talks in reference to that fight. Kubrat Pulev, you can forget about Kubrat Pulev. He's coming off that vicious knockout at the hands of Anthony Joshua. Joseph is looking like the likeliest guy to participate in this final eliminator with Philippe Hrgovic. Joseph, who's coming off of 5 consecutive wins, quote-unquote 5 consecutive wins, since having lost to Dillian White. Joseph's a former champion. He's got plenty of professional experience, and at this point, there's just no excuses to make for him. There's no reason for him to move backwards or move away from a final eliminator with an untested prospect, because Philippe Hrgovic does have the look of a formidable fighter, and perhaps he's better than what we've seen so far.
But it's not on paper.
That if Philippe Hrgovic is some kind of a world beater, that moniker has neither been proven nor earned. This would be his opportunity to earn it against Joseph Parker. Joseph, who you just can't make excuses for at this point.
You really can't.
What are people going to say if he decides to have a second fight with Derek Chisora? What does fighting Derek Chisora for a second time do for Joseph Parker? Does it bring him closer to fighting for a world title?
No.
Hell, do people even want to see the fight? How much money is there really in a Derek Chisora rematch?
Assuming anybody would even put it on.
And even if there's slightly more money in a Chisora rematch than a Philippe Hrgovic fight, it's not the money you're supposed to be looking at in the Hrgovic fight. It's what's beyond that fight, getting past Philippe to the real rewards, the big prizes. Joseph Parker is in a situation where he's got to move forwards because he can't move backwards. And finally, ahead of tonight's big super middleweight title fight between Billy Joe Saunders and Canelo Alvarez, Eubank promoter, Saunders win or lose with Canelo would be a big fight for Chris, who still wants to avenge a 2014 split decision loss to Saunders. Eubank expects Canelo to win tonight's fight and actually bet $10,000 on the Mexican superstar to win inside the distance. According to his promoter, a rematch with Saunders would be a huge fight. Win or lose, both Canelo and Billy Joe Saunders are potential targets, Sarlin told Sky Sports. Billy Joe, there's a history there between the pair of them. It's a stadium filler. It's a massive fight. Win or lose for Billy Joe at the weekend. That's a huge fight out there, and I'm sure it's one that will happen. It's a question, of course, when. Of course, Canelo as well. If you looked at Canelo and Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, we'd probably want to go down the Triple G route first, because we do see ourselves at 160 middleweight at the moment. Not saying that for certain opportunities, Eubank Jr. could go back up to super middleweight, but it's going to be an interesting weekend to watch what happens. For us, it's not only interesting watching what happens, but to see if opportunities arise out of that.
I'm not expecting to see a rematch no time soon.
A rematch between Chris and Billy? No, I don't see that happening no time soon. And it's because, win or lose, Billy Joe Saunders is going to be preoccupied. If he loses the way I think he's going to lose, for the reasons I think he's going to lose,
Canelo's going to apply more pressure on him than has ever been applied.
and maybe Billy Joe Saunders looks good in the first quarter of the fight, maybe even the beginning of the second quarter, but he will tire, he will gas. I think Canelo Alvarez is going to target his midsection to take the air out of those tires, take the legs away from Billy Joe Saunders, who's likely to spend most of this fight on the balls of his feet moving around the ring. The expenditure of energy is critical in this fight and how it's going to look. And when exactly will Canelo Alvarez be able to pin this guy down and punish him? I don't think Billy Joe Saunders has the punching power to get Canelo Alvarez's respect. I think what Billy's going to do is fight on the fly, flick that lead hand looking to walk Canelo Alvarez into something, and to Canelo's credit, he's got some of the best angles and the best upper body movement in the business, fully capable of closing the gap and slipping the jab simultaneously. I don't see this fight ending well for Billy Joe Saunders, but even if it did, let's say the unthinkable happens and Billy Joe Saunders beats Canelo Alvarez, in all likelihood, there's going to be a second fight that's worth the same as, if not more money, for Billy Joe Saunders. So why the fuck would he fight Chris Eubank Jr. for a second time?
I heard there's no rematch clause in the contract for this fight.
Though even if there isn't, put your thinking caps on, kids. You're talking about a situation where there are no preset splits for a second fight, for a potential rematch, that if Billy Joe Saunders unseats Canelo Alvarez as this division's unified champion, they'd literally enter into a fresh set of negotiations where Billy Joe Saunders has some leverage, because it would be Canelo Alvarez that needs the rematch. And the splits, they wouldn't be predetermined because there's no rematch clause. In that situation, a rematch with Canelo is worth far more money than anything Chris Eubank Jr. can provide. What's Chris bring to the table? Now, let's say it happens the way I think it's going to happen. Let's say Billy loses. I still don't think he gives Chris Eubank Jr. the time of day, because he will have just made himself millions upon millions of dollars.
That fucking guy's gonna go on holiday.
Guy's gonna go on a long vacation. I'd be surprised if he fights again this year.
He ain't fighting Chris.